I'd like to introduce our panelists, Anne-Laure Fayard and Laurent Lisimachio. Now, Anne-Laure is an associate professor of innovation, design, and organizational studies at NYU. She's also the author of a truly excellent article. It's called Designing the Hybrid Office. And Laurent is the design director as well as principal at Gensler. Why don't we start with what the office, as Kevin said, what is the office for and what does it need to look like? Researchers, we know this, have said that in office time with hybrid work should be about collaboration, communication, creativity. But what does that mean specifically? How do we visualize what that is? What are we getting rid of? What are we keeping and what are we adding that's new? And you know what, I'd love to hear from both of you. Why don't we start with Anne-Laure?
Okay, thank you. That's a great question. I think that there are offices that were already very well designed pre-pandemic for having a lot of this collaboration. And so if you already have them, there's not that much to be done. I think that if you look at the idea of collaboration and informal, or what I call unstructured collaboration, so is this more of a serendipitous kind of connections, having different areas where people can connect informally. It can be, you can think of like, the traditional water cooler or coffee machine, but like a more institutional version of them. And I'm sure Laurent and Gensler have been doing a lot of this interesting work that I've seen in some of their projects. But I think it's also balancing, and I think the previous panel was talking about like different needs. So I think that a lot of the things that we've been thinking of now is more about collaboration and connecting people. But I think remembering that some people might need still to do some individual work in the office, and then that you might want to do some small group meetings. And so I've talked even in previous research about these like semi-private spaces, kind of alcoves where people can get together and have a small connection. So I think it's going to be a lot about modularity, flexibility, and having ways of addressing both group and individual work, rather than just having a kind of, I think we thought about the office until, not that long ago as something very permanent. And that the current situation is kind of challenging our view of the physical space as something permanent. But I'm sure Laurent has many more observation on that.
Well, Anne-Laure, I mean, first of all, many of my observations are going to be very close to yours. By the way, it's wonderful to see you again. Yes, you said a few very important terms here. Flexibility is the first one, I think, that comes to mind. Offices in this new world will certainly have to adapt to some of the lessons that we have learned over the past year, but also about an unknown future. Adaptability is probably the number one recommendation that we give to our clients as they think about embarking into redesigning or designing a workplace today. And as you said, flexibility is key also. But, even though I'm an architect and my focus is on the built environment, I think now more than ever, technology is going to be the critical path for offices to stay relevant and to function in an optimal way. We have actually had an incredible experience in the last year working from home, where technology really worked very well for us. I'm actually in an office right now. I'm in our New York office, and the video conferencing capabilities that we have in our homes are in a way better than some of the ones that we left behind in our offices. So improving and continuing to innovate on the collaborative technology front is going to be critical going forward.
So let's add a little bit of specificity to some of these recommendations. I was very intrigued. You may have seen the Times ran photos of Google's new hybrid plans for its offices. And I'm curious about sort of which kinds of innovations do you think are just gimmicks and which are really going to be necessary in an office. So for example, they're working with these sort of automated hotel desks. So when you come in, it automatically configures for your height, it even puts your personal pictures up on screens. It loads your documents onto the computers. You've got that. They show these sort of funky balloon dividers that blow up when you have to have a private conversation, movable HVAC, ventilation systems, open air huts. I mean, what specifically do you think are sort of the must-haves, the best ideas for specific innovations? And again, we could start with Anne-Laure again.
I think I've seen some of these pictures. I'm just curious to see. I think time will tell us what is gimmick and what really works. I think that we don't necessarily need to have like these huge, like big things. What I've seen, being done by various companies, including Gensler, is really thinking more about like having ways to be modular and have ways of connecting different people, creating smaller rooms. And so it can be just physical things that you can move around, rather than, if you don't have the capability and the resources to have like, blowing balloons, I think that you can still do something. And also, I think that, pre-pandemic, there was already a lot of conversation and critiques of open plan offices. And there was already a movement towards like thinking in terms of neighborhoods. So I think like having a way of already rethinking your office where people can know where the places where you can do a certain types of work. So, if you're in the cafe or if you're in the library, it sends you different setup. I think might be more durable and sustainable and applicable to multiple people. Then I think that, health and safety has been like in all surveys comes up as like something that people worry about. So I think that making sure that people feel comfortable, that, the ventilation system works and that there are different ways of doing this, I think is really important. Now, do you need to have like, pictures on your screen? Maybe, maybe not. I think it also depends on who are the people. But what I've heard and, in my research is that like for some people, personalizing their desk is more important than for others. And so figuring out ways of allowing people to, when they come back to the office, the few days they might come back to the office, they feel comfortable there and that it's not like just an empty space, I think would be, ways. And I've seen different ways of doing that are not necessarily super high tech, and that I think can still, provide these kind of things.
Laurent?
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate the experimentation that our friends and clients at Google have put forward, and that they were happy to share some of those experimentations with the world, because look, innovation isn't going to happen without some people trying certain things that may seem a little bit far-fetched, right? I think that the spirit of some of those innovations is absolutely right, in the sense that there is going to be a need for completely frictionless docking and user experience around the office. The office occupant in 2021 is an educated consumer, and people who come to the office are going to expect everything to work. And I don't think it's far-fetched to imagine that when you come to the office, if you have a sit-stand desk, that you can have, these are products that are out there and they're pretty common, that there's a QR code on the desk. And so when you scan it with your phone, it knows who you are and it brings the desk back to the height that you saved last time. These are things that are really within grasp in terms of available innovations for the office. It is going to be up to companies to decide that they're going to invest in some of those technologies and some of those designs. And I would certainly encourage leaders to consider those.
So sticking with that theme about the technology that you've been talking about, Laurent, and since you're designing offices now, how do you think about replicating the things that we miss when we have a hybrid office, the serendipitous meetings by the elevator? How do you ensure that that the culture permeates the entire place? How do you promote social ties? How, when you're working with the physicality and the technology, how do you think about doing that?
Well, Joanne, I have to be honest, there are certain things that we will never be able to replicate completely in a virtual environment. And what a lot of our research has shown, a lot of the surveys that not only Gensler, but a lot of our clients have conducted with their own employees has shown is that even though remote work has had a lot of benefits, and many companies report even better productivity among other benefits over the last year working remotely, there is a lot also that was lost in this past year. And what you were just pointing out, Joanne, is among the many things that employees are reporting they miss the most. And so I don't know that there will ever be a technology that, even though, yes, we've had events, we've had happy hours remotely last year with our colleagues, this is where, and you may say that I'm a little biased, but this is where I believe that the office is irreplaceable. I think that the humanistic component of the workplace is still very much needed, even if it is only for a portion of the time. Even if one comes in only a handful of times per week, I think that is probably the first thing that people will want to get back.
One of the biggest questions we're always hearing about is, what do we do about meetings? How do we make the meetings work better? And Anne-Laure, you've talked about this in your writing before. What configuration might enable us to at least feel like we have a more inclusive environment? So
I think it's a big issue, is like, how do we connect? Because I think when we think hybrid work, we're thinking, either the remote of the people, but there's a lot about the inclusion of a connection. And, technology, again, can help, and space can help. I think that there's also organizational processes. And so I think for me, really, space is one piece. Laurent has highlighted the technology piece. I'll add to that, kind of a combination, organizational processes and having new norms to think about, in that case, meeting. So of course, in terms of space and technology, having a range of things. So because we're not necessarily in big meetings, we might be just a one-on-one, but if you're in a more open, area, if, we're getting rid of like private offices, then we want to have some privacy. And I think we've seen that even before in open plan offices, people started putting like more phone booths. So I think that like having easy capabilities for video, although I also realize that we can still have a phone call. We don't necessarily always need to have like a video call, but let's say have a smaller one. And then for the meeting rooms, I think that what I've seen is people starting rethinking having like smaller screens, because now oftentimes, it used to be this kind of big meeting rooms with a screen at the back, and it creates this kind of big distance. So I think people have been looking at that, and I'm sure Laurent has like some examples, but I've seen, examples of people trying to think of like having meeting rooms where you have a screen and then a chair, and then a screen and a chair, so that you really have a hybrid thing and you feel like you're around the same table, or at least having like smaller screens where people can pop up. Frog Design in their new office studio in Austin has been like really thinking about like having easily access to video for small meetings and bigger meetings. So they redesigned their old space. So I think it's really getting that. But then there's also rules. So, I've seen, and it's still being debated. And I guess it's back to Laurent's point. It's like we're experimenting, and I think we'll figure it out. And it might depend on the companies. But, some companies is like, oh, we have this, we're going to try this rule that if it's only one person that is remote, then everybody has to be, remote, even if they're in the office. But then it creates, of course, this backlash, which is, well, I'm here in the office and I have to have my headset and be on my screen instead of having this kind of, connection that Laurent was just describing that will be the reason, one of the most, the main reason why people want to go back to the office. So I think it's like figuring out as an organization, whatever, or as a team, depending, what are the rules and how do we decide like how many people need to be in person or hybrid so that we all go remote is going to be something that we need to be thinking of.
It's interesting. I hear both of you really stressing the importance of flexibility and how the office is designed. And it makes me wonder about the open office plan. A lot of researchers say it's bad for your physical health, it's bad for your mental health. But I wonder if when we're talking about this flexibility, are we moving toward more, or are we going to further entrench this sort of open office, or are we moving away from it?
Okay, I'll take this one. I'll start this one because I'm pretty passionate about it. We've heard for the last decade, Anne-Laure, you and I have talked about this before, many, and we've read many articles about how bad open plan is. And I always answer, it's just poorly designed open plan that's the problem, not open plan as a general concept. I think that what has been a problem in the past with open plan has been the extreme density that was being achieved with really mostly a financial gain. It's particularly in urban centers where real estate is so it comes at a very high cost. The open plan was a solution to save real estate. So and that has had some negative effects. No, I don't believe that the answer to what the future of work will require is more enclosed private space. However, it will require more enclosed collaborative space. That is for sure. But again, what is really important is that this new collaborative space be well designed. What I am 100% convinced of is that the designs of 2019, particularly around conferencing, will not work with the requirements of hybrid work, with, as you were saying, Anne-Laure, with some people being remote and some people being in person. Because conference rooms were really designed predominantly for the people who are here with you in the room. The screen was always an accessory. The screen cannot be an accessory anymore. The audio cannot be something that is, scratchy and of poor definition. We need to hear and see remote participants very well. And it also has to be an equitable experience. I think some of the talk in the previous panel centered around that notion of equitable experience. So it's not fair for someone who is dialing in remotely to have a subpar experience. So there's amazing opportunities in design right now around enclosed collaborative space as well as open space.
Anne-Laure, did you want to add to that?
I completely agree. I think that there's been a lot of debate about open plan offices, but I think that, again, as I was mentioning before, there was already in the practitioner side, like a move back to thinking about neighborhoods and adding more of different types of meeting rooms. So what I've seen in places where, like in my research, where there was like only like huge open plan, people were fighting to get the meeting rooms to be able to either work, alone or in small group. And that's been, a lot of organization has started rethinking that. So I think it's really a great opportunity for design. But again, as it was mentioned in the previous panel, I think that really thinking about inclusion and different needs, the same way open plan used to be better for extrovert than for introverts. We need to be thinking about the different types of needs that people have. And I think that, I'm just mentioning one, but gender and race and like different family background and experiences, all of this has to be taken into account. And we tend to think of space as this one, template, but it isn't. And then people will also interpret it. So I'm sure Laurent sees that when he designed a space, he might be surprised by how people then are going to use a room in a different way. So I think, or like use patterns and flows in the space. So I think it's really super important to keep that in mind as we rethink the way we're working. And again, it's about space and ways of working, and not only just the space.
So we are just about out of time. I want to ask one last question, if we could think about this just quickly. There's a lot of concern about excess office space. There's the space for rent, sublet space is up something like 40% over this last year. The question is, should companies expect this to be a trend? Or are they going to expand to fill that office space? Or what should they do with that extra space? For example, we spoke earlier about all the women who have, working mothers in particular, who have left the workforce. Could we turn that extra office space into daycare to allow the women to come back to work? What's your thinking about where we are going in terms of the space footprint for companies? And if each of you could answer relatively quickly. Laurent?
Yeah, maybe I'll start. I don't think we should rush to let go of all of this real estate, because I believe we're going to find out very quickly that we need it to reconfigure these spaces to fit the need of the office worker of 2022 and beyond. And you're right, Joanne, it may very well be the need for more amenities, childcare, wellness, more meeting space, more conferencing, co-working space, all of these things that we are in the middle of exploring and thinking about going forward, which may very well compensate for a lesser need for individual office space.
And Anne-Laure?
Yeah, so I think that we tend to imagine that hybrid is going to squeeze the space, but like we might need, in fact, more space with these new ways of working. I think daycares would be a lot of people, women would like it, and maybe also fathers, would like it too. I've heard recently, talking with companies, they were also thinking of bringing some of their clients to be working, in the space with them at some point. So I think that it's also maybe going to be reconfiguring the relationships between companies and their clients and suppliers. If your headquarters in the city and the headquarters in another city, and you have some of your employees that are closer, you might find like interesting ways of building new ways of working together.
Great. I think that's a great place to end our conversation. So we're going to wrap things up here. Anne-Laure, Laurent, thank you both for joining us today for this great conversation.